sadly, not to be too gallows humor about it, but this is quite possibly looking like a pattern. History is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know.
Two Russian oligarchs were found dead 1 day apart alongside their wives and children, reports say. So first of all, we all know the parts of the world, especially Russia and Ukraine, as well as a whole bunch of other countries, are embroiled in some serious hot war right now. Ukraine obviously taking the brunt of the physical damage there, and mental and all the other types of damage, but a lot of other countries are getting involved, and there's the sanctions that have been imposed on Russia have been hitting specifically their natural gas and gas industries, most of which, or at least the largest corporations that function in that industry, are state-run, but there are a few that are outside that are independent, and there exists something called an oligarch. And I wonder, Ben and Noel, could we just go over what an oligarch is before we jump into this story?
Sure. Like Elon Musk would be an example of an oligarch. I'm kidding.
Sort of a modern, he's like a new oligarch for sure. I remember from school, like an oligarch is definitely, it's sort of like a monarch, but based on money alone, right? Essentially, like based on power of the purse.
Yeah. It's so whenever you hear the term oligarchy, all that means is government by the few, right? And people would say that maybe post-Soviet Russia turned into an effective oligarchy, although honestly during communism it was still very oligarchical and hierarchical. But if you really want to put the sting on someone, then you'll call their government a plutocracy, which means governed by the rich, or you call them a kleptocracy, which means governed by thieves. An oligarch now has a very specific term. I love that we're talking about the very wealthy and we're talking about language again. It has a very specific kind of connotation today, which would be a titan of industry, like you're describing, Noel, who uses their business power to influence affairs that would normally be affairs of the state. So would love to hear from some of our fellow listeners on this. Would you consider very powerful U.S. business types as oligarchs? At what point do they cross that financial political Rubicon? But that's basically like what an oligarch is. But you're playing with language at that point, because consider, like, if you want to, for example, another language game, if you want to know whether the U.S. considers a country friendly or a candidate for a student-led revolution, we'll say, then look how they're described. They'll describe the governments that they like as governments. They'll describe the governments they don't like as regimes. So these are the kind of language games.
Almost always.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Well, okay, so we're talking about oligarchs in Russia, but one of them was in Russia. The other one was hanging out somewhere else. Okay, so this is what happened. These are rough stories, so this is just a warning. If you're listening to this and you're faint of heart or you don't like stories about death, stop listening now. And I guess this would be the end of the episode. So bye, write to us. Okay. A person named Vladislav Avayev, who was the former vice president of Gazprom Bank. This is the third largest bank in Russia, and it services, as you might have guessed, Gazprom. This is the major exporter of natural gas. This is the state-run company, Gazprom. So lots and lots of money. This guy was the former vice president of the company. He was found dead of a gunshot wound. He was in his Moscow apartment. Also found in that apartment were his wife and his daughter. They were dead from apparent gunshot wounds. According to a few other sources, there were a total of 13 weapons found within that apartment, and it was on the 14th floor, just so you know, and they considered it a luxury apartment, obviously. a pistol was found in Mr. Avayev's hand, and the apartment door was locked from the inside. This is all the initial reporting that's coming out on this event. Terribly, terribly tragic. You can see reporting, like I said, out of Sky News Australia, where they go into a little more detail about theories that have emerged, but none of those theories, I mean, you can't really talk about them with any sincerity because they're just comments that were made generally by neighbors. So, you know, they just don't hold a lot of weight. One was that Mrs. Avayev was pregnant. Her name was Yelena. She was 47 years old, and allegedly she was pregnant. And the rumor is that it was by his driver. The child was fathered by his driver, and that is why this occurred. It was a murder-suicide. But there are other reports that say she was not pregnant at all. Again, it's a matter of this happening pretty recently, not a lot of information coming out, and also a lot of private things that probably may never come out, depending on how this case moves forward. And again, yeah, this whole Sky News thing about some believed it was economic pressures because of the war that's occurring in Ukraine right now, because of the economic sanctions. These pressures caused this murder-suicide to occur. Others believe that the family was killed by an entirely third party, and it was the entire family that was slaughtered and made to look a certain way.
Yeah, and it's also, I do want to shout out Newsweek, which made a full list of, quote, every Russian oligarch who has died since Putin invaded Ukraine. Sadly, you know, not to be too gallows humor about it, but this is quite possibly looking like a pattern. And there are already, I know you had mentioned, or I can't remember if we talked about this off air, Matt, but I know I'd seen a lot of scuttlebutt that argued at least one of these guys was murdered such that it looked like a suicide, or officially was considered a suicide, but that their lives were taken because they refused to play ball with some bids on Gazprom. Did you hear about that?
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, this is what leads me to the second story. That was just the first person that died. Terrible, tragic story of one person and their family. The second story occurs on the next day. A person named Sergei Protosenya, who was 55 years old. He is the former vice president and chief accountant of another company, this one titled Novatek, Novatek. This is the second largest company in Russia involved in, guess what, producing natural gas and oil. Again, different because it's independent, not state-run, like Gazprom is. This person was found dead. They were hanged in the garden of this villa that they rented. It's about 75 kilometers north of Barcelona in Spain. I don't even know how to say it. Lloret de Mar, I think. Lloret de Mar. Also, very similarly to the previous story, this person's wife and daughter were found dead at the villa. They were both in their beds. They were dead of apparent stab wounds. Next to this person, Sergei, who was hanged, they found a bloody axe and a bloody knife. But guess what? No suicide note, and there were no bloodstains anywhere on Sergei's body, which, to me, says this was staged.
Ooh, you mean like execution style? I'm sorry, you mean the killing was done a certain way and the crime scene was staged to make it appear as though it happened in a different manner?
Well, I think it is just highly unlikely that you could somehow stab to death your wife and daughter in their beds and not get any blood on you.